it's possible to make the same mistake twice. And that sucks. Like, even just thinking about it, I'm like, I just want to learn the first time. 99% of people would not have it. 99% of people are gone. But there might be that 1% where God has specifically giving the grace to help you walk through this. You have to have a PhD on yourself. You have to do the research. There have been times where I've said to God, like, I literally cannot see how I will get from A to B unless you help me all the way. Hey roomies. Today I want to talk about the importance of identifying your own red flags, the realities of navigating life and relationships with red flags, and how to find God's grace in your imperfection. Straight off the bat, I have a question for you. Are you the kind of woman that you would want your son or future son to marry? Now, if you answered no to that question, the reasons why you said no are probably what you are identifying as your red flags. If you answered yes to that question, that could be a good thing because it might mean that you feel like you're in a healthy place and you've done some internal work. But it could also mean that you have some major blind spots. I want to assume that the fact that you've bothered to click on this video means that you have some level of self-awareness. For me, 10, 9, 8, 7 years ago, the answer would have been a no. Today, I feel like it would be a yes, but I would still add an asterisk to that yes. That leads to some really helpful notes. And the reason I would say that is because I have been on a long journey of identifying my red flags, bearing the consequences of them, and finding God's grace throughout the journey. Now, of course, we don't reach our peak. We never get to the point where we are perfect, but we can absolutely be in a healthy place and continue to grow as things come to our attention. Now, it might feel strange to be talking about red flags and then talking about yourself rather than another person. I feel like the language that we use around red flags is about evaluating another person. But the reality is that you have red flags. And I want to make clear as well that when I talk about red flags, I'm not talking about someone's worth or someone's value or implying that there's somebody that you shouldn't be interacting with or can't be in a relationship with. I'm simply talking about those warning signs that tell us that there's something here that they're probably still working on or not even aware of that might make it difficult for them to operate in a healthy way in a relationship. We all have blind spots, but you have to be able to even comprehend that it's possible for you to have red flags before you can deal with them. There was a time in my life, especially when I was in the thick of that victim mentality mindset, where I could literally see no fault in anything that I was doing or in any situation that went wrong. It was always what the other person did to me, and it was never how I was contributing to the situation. So for example, instead of thinking about how I lacked boundaries, I would be thinking about how somebody took advantage. And it's not to even say that the two can't exist at the same time, but there was zero accountability, and it was always about what somebody had done to me. You are not infallible, girl. Like, I was at the height of pride in those times where there just was nothing ever that was my fault. I have worked through being anxiously attached or being unable or unwilling to take responsibility. Also being chronically organized, i.e. needing to be in control of absolutely everything. I've had to work on speaking with grace, and so many other things. And I feel like the last two I'm definitely still working on, but we've come a long way, guys. We've come a very long way. And the reality is that we are always evolving. So even if you are in a healthy place, which is great, new situations will bring up new things that you might need to work through. Another thing I want to say is that you are a red flag. Okay, I don't want to say you are a red flag because that just feels heavy. You have red flags feels a lot more non-defeatist. But yeah, you have red flags for a reason. Now, This is to give yourself grace, not to make excuses. This is to be compassionate towards yourself. What I mean is that the red flags that you have, the issues that you're trying to resolve, the ways in which you glitch in relationships or in different situations, is based on something. We cannot get sick and tired of having to go back and dig up stuff, because the way in which we grow up and the things we experience usually shape the way we see ourselves, the way we see the world around us, the way we see other people, and ultimately the ways in which we've learned to cope. So some of these things may not be your fault, but at this point, they are your responsibility. It can be so easy to spot things in other people, especially as you're just getting to know them and they share about themselves, their histories, their family, their experiences. You can start to hear ways in which there might be gaps for them that at some point they would have had to fill with some kind of coping mechanism, or a way in which they will now start reacting to their environment, to other people, and to the world in general because of some things that have happened to them. Things impact people in different ways. Even siblings who grow up in the same house and maybe lose a parent at the same time react to that in very different ways. But sometimes there are some obvious patterns, some telltale signs that you can trace from one event to how the person behaves and reacts today. When I was thinking about making this video, one of the first things that I wrote down was that despite your red flags, you still deserve to be loved. And I just want to emphasize that so early on in this video, because sometimes it feels like the narrative is that if someone has red flags, then they are dismissible. But we all have a need to be loved and to belong. And so whether it's being loved unconditionally by your family or your friends or your community at large, I want you to know that you deserve to be loved exactly as you are right now. God is ready to receive you unconditionally. The Bible says that Christ died for us while we were yet sinners. And so his love is not based on your red flags or the absence thereof. It is absolutely unconditional. So now that we've cleared that up, let's talk about navigating. So yesterday I had some friends round for lunch and we were talking about everything, including relationships. Now, one of my friends, he had shared recently that he was no longer in his relationship, and we were absolutely shocked because he had previously been talking about saving up for a ring and wanting to get married. But she had gotten impatient with how long it was taking him to propose to her, and had basically made rash decisions and ended up ending the relationship. Without him going into major details, I knew exactly what was happening. As he was talking, I could see myself in her. We let him explain, obviously going to the detail. And yeah, at the end of it, I really just could understand where he was coming from in terms of being fine to end the relationship and keep it there because of how just irrational it felt like she was being. But I felt the need to explain to him exactly what had happened with me in a different situation, and just really help him see that it probably had little to do with him, and she probably doesn't want to react or behave or protect herself in the way that she did, but she might not have the ability to do anything different from what she's doing now. I also think about Linnell. So she's an American rapper. She's a Christian, and she shares about her story and her journey with her husband, and very similar situation in terms of everything's going well in relationship. You've had all the conversations and he just isn't proposed yet, right? And I remember her saying that she spoke to her dad and her dad told her to calm down. And I think he did that because her husband now, who was her boyfriend then, had already had a conversation with her dad about, what he was planning to do and where things were going. And so if not for her dad telling her to calm the heck down, she might have been in a similar situation where she was like, oh, forget it. You don't love me. You don't want to be with me or whatever. Like, you're taking too long, and walked away from that situation. I also listened to, there's a theme here, guys. I also listened to recently Whitney and D'Angelo. So Whitney, I know from like just Instagram, right? D'Angelo, I think I'm just familiar with now because they've gotten engaged. But thousands of us have watched their interview with the Dear Future Wifey podcast. And I remember a clip from that coming out, and it was about just the different points at which in the relationship she had to kind of take a step back and recalibrate and then come back into it because, you know, stuff inside her was just kicking off. And yeah, she needed to like recalibrate to still be in it, essentially. But there was one point in particular where I think she had gotten to the point where she was willing, I think, for to give up the relationship. And then he was really hurt by it, but somehow they, you know, figured it out and moved forward, and now they're married. And I just, honestly, I could relate on so many levels because I have a self-sabotage story or two of my own. And I'm amazed at, you know, Lanelle's story and Whitney's story. But like I mentioned about, you know, my friend who came around yesterday and his now ex-girlfriend, there are lots of situations that don't end in happily ever after. There are consequences for the ways in which our issues come up in relationships where, you know, we hurt people, or people end up feeling rejected, or sometimes they just think you're crazy, depending on what this red flag is. And yeah, there's a loss there. Like, you can, you know, lose relationships, lose friendships, lose opportunities. There are actual consequences to red flags. The situations have different outcomes. But the reality is that you cannot control how somebody chooses to respond to what they're seeing in you. Even if you're able to explain why, whether in the situation or on reflection afterwards, nobody owes you a second chance. Everybody has the right to protect themselves. In saying that, though, I feel like God has also given specific people in your life, and that you will meet, a grace for the things that you're working through. So I remember reading about Joyce Meyer's husband, or listening, I can't remember now, it would have been a long time ago. But I just remember there was some conversation about Joyce Meyer's husband before they met. He was a very stable, secure, like Christian, you know, God-loving guy. And I remember hearing that when he prayed for a wife, he prayed for somebody who had issues. He was willing and wanted to do work. He wanted to be a grace to someone in that way. And so this guy was actively praying. Now that's another level, right? It's one thing to meet someone and to obviously, you know, be understanding, accommodating, and that kind of thing. It's another thing to be praying specifically for someone with struggles. But yeah, I remember hearing that and just thought, what on earth? I've listened to Preston Perry talking about, you know, his relationship with Jackie when they were dating as well. When you listen to this story and you hear some of the stuff that came up for her that he had to navigate, and I think at some point he definitely shares about like just being done and wanting to give up, and God, yeah, basically sending him back and very much, you know, putting a mirror to him to say like, you know, you're not perfect either type thing. So yeah, I feel like in some situations, like 99% of people would not have it. 99% of people are gone. But there might be that 1% where God has specifically giving the grace to help you walk through this. And that is obviously in the context of romantic relationship. Like, friendships don't always work out because of some of the stuff that people are dealing with as well. And even families, you know. Now, if you don't deal with certain things as and when they come up, when you know about them, because when they're not in your consciousness, I feel like it's really difficult to even talk about, you know, working on them and healing and growing, because you don't have a clue why you're glitching anyway. But in the situations where, you know, you've identified things, I feel like it's really important to say that it's possible to make the same mistake twice. And that sucks. Like, even just thinking about it, I'm like, I just want to learn the first time. I don't know. Obviously, it might just be a perfectionism thing. If I make a mistake and then I suffer the consequences, I would want to believe that that is enough to mean that it will never happen again. But the reality is that sometimes we find ourselves making the same mistake again and again and again. So the reason you'd be making the same mistake again is either because you haven't really gone all the way down to find out why it's happening and really go to the root of it. So maybe you got to, the third layer down when there are 5 layers and you still need to keep digging. You have to get to know yourself. You have to have a PhD on yourself. You have to do the research. If you are able to map out your life, like just grab a piece of paper and map out, all the positives on the top of the line, top half of the page, and all the positives and all the negatives, below that, and just see what comes up and see if you can draw some lines from then to now. Just really understand you. You want to give God space to work as well. So what I mean by that is that it's very easy to say like, God will heal, God will help. But if we don't give him the actual space, if we're not willing to let go of the ways in which we are coping, or the ways in which we are self-protecting, or the ways in which we are pacifying, we won't be able to see his power and how he is able to work in our lives. You can't have both. You do have to put one down, and it's not a one-time thing, but you definitely have to be willing to take the risk and go through the discomfort of actually seeing God at work in your life. Please be patient with yourself, because this journey is not an overnight journey. Like I mentioned, I feel like it's been 7, 8, 9, 10 years of just chipping at the same things and discovering new layers, and sometimes even discovering by being in a situation and then things flare up and you're triggered. And then you're like, oh, I still need to deal with that. That's still there. And I think sometimes our perception of the point at which we know about something and the point at which we are in a healthy place is so short. Like, we want to be done in a couple of weeks. Like, oh, now I know, I just want to be in a new place now, where sometimes it takes years. Sometimes we are impatient and we start doing the work and we, have eureka moments where we're unpacking things and we're in a new space. And then instead of us to see it through, almost like antibiotics, when you're supposed to take the antibiotics even after the symptoms have subsided because you need the entire course, it's like that, basically. I feel like what I have done a lot of the time is something's happened and I can see clearly now the rain has gone. And I'm now like hyper focused on like, yeah, we're going to tackle it. We're going to do it. And then, it becomes less urgent. Maybe the excitement is gone, or, the pain of the consequences is gone. And like, I've put it on the back burner again. Sometimes our learning takes place in the context. There's only so much you can learn about being a parent without actually being a parent, right? There's lots that you can learn, absolutely, that will be helpful, but it's really hard to be able to actually learn while not on the job for some things. So I would say the aim really is to be able to learn as much as you can outside the context, but the context itself is a learning environment. So don't expect to, just be like tick, 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 ready, without actually going through the practical of that particular context as well. One thing that has been so helpful for me is observing others that are in a healthy place. I don't necessarily mean that everything about them is perfect and amazing. I mean, maybe you've seen something in them that they do really well. So maybe you have a friend and you're like, she does boundaries really well. I want to learn that. I want to learn, how she's doing that. You can ask, you can absolutely find out more, and it's all part of learning. But sometimes you're actually just learning through observing as well, because you don't know certain things are a possible way to react to something until you see someone reacting that way and you see the positive outcomes, or how well things went based on the way they reacted rather than the way you would have chosen to react. And you just learn from that. You just start to imbibe these things that you're seeing from the people around you who are doing certain things really well. Go to God. I want to emphasize that, because as much as I'm talking about all the things that you will need to do, I never want to miss the point that God is the one who actually does the healing. He's the one who actually gives the grace for growth. Your job is to turn up. Your job is to go to him and communicate with him and to let him help you. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know exactly what route to take to get to the other side. God has everything you're going to need. Things will be required of you, yes, but you can rest in God, who is looking after the process and is committed to your healing. He wants you to come with him, and he absolutely is the giver and the enabler in this dynamic always, but there will still be a part for you to play. There will still be an interaction and an effort. It will not be passive. It can't be passive. So just, I think, have the mindset of being in the game and actually getting involved, because there will be work to do. Now, we can't talk about struggles and shortcomings without discussing shame, guilt, and regret. There's a likelihood that you will have experienced or be experiencing any of these or all of these in relation to your red flags. All of those emotions are actually useful, but they are useful to a point. When I think about this, the analogy that comes to mind is the screwball. I don't know if you remember the cone-shaped ice cream with the bubble gum at the bottom. Now, it was always a nice treat to get to the end of it and to have that bubble gum. But if you remember, all the food coloring and the sugar is the first hit. And then after about 2 minutes, it starts to taste a bit like carpet. That's such a weird thing to say, but that's the only thing that came to mind. It just starts to taste like this needs to come out of my mouth right now. And I feel like that's how guilt, shame, and regret operate. It's like in the initial, when you're reflecting and that stuff comes up, that stuff just makes you human. It just signals to you that, something went wrong. And those are responses to those things going wrong, especially when you're taking accountability for the part that you had to play. But we can't just sit there. Regret, I would say, was my biggest struggle, or has been my biggest struggle. I've definitely dealt with shame, definitely dealt with guilt as well. And I feel like at some point I had chronic regret, like the regret that is useless in terms of moving you forward, because you've already processed the parts that are useful to process and that will actually help you do something different next time. And now you're actually just living in this place of constant self-bashing and punishment. Instead of it to be having a positive impact on you, it's now having a negative impact. If Paul, after being responsible for so many deaths or so many Christians, could come to the point where he was serving God with his whole heart and never looking back, you can move forward from whatever it is that you have done. You can move forward from the ways in which you've hurt people, the ways in which you've let yourself down, the ways in which you're struggling to even see how you move forward from here or how anything's ever going to be different. God is really the one who, where we are guilty, where we should be ashamed, where we should have regret, he is the one who, after we've processed the emotions for good use, lifts us out of the depths of those negative emotions. And that's what Paul reflected on. He didn't let these things become his identity. He kept it moving. He kept it moving in all humility, but knowing that he was truly forgiven and that God had a plan for him and a place for him and so much grace towards him despite everything that had happened. One way that I found those emotions to be helpful in moving me forward is what I call cleaning up the church girl persona. So there was a perception I had of myself, like I said, dealing with so much pride, but there was a perception I had of myself of just being like, Mrs. Goody Two Shoes, Mrs. Church Girl, Mrs. Does the right thing, knows the right thing. And there'd be times where I let myself down or I let other people down. And really in the guilt or the shame or the regret, it felt like, I'm really not like as amazing as I thought I was. And that was actually good for me. There's obviously a place of, self deprecation and self-hate and all those things that are way in the other direction. So that's not what I'm talking about. But even just being able to see yourself rightly and to really have the right measure of yourself, it's helpful because if you know where you actually are, then you know the steps you can take to move forward. But if you're high and mighty and butter couldn't melt, where you're concerned, then there's no work to be done. So in those situations, I would realize that actually when I'm struggling to go to God and I'm feeling unworthy because of something I've done, it's because actually it's breaking down a perception of myself that I was better than I thought I was, right? Because the point of grace is that you're not actually worthy. But sometimes in those instances, you see it more clearly because when you're good and everything's good, and I use the word good loosely, but when everything's, at level, it's easy to think like, yeah, God's grace, but also me. In those situations, oh boy, you see very clearly how much God's grace is doing, right? And you start to appreciate it in a different way. So they're useful, those emotions, to work some stuff in and out of you. But the issue becomes when you live there. We don't want to live there. It is not, the view is not nice. Those emotions can come to visit at different points. There might be reminders or new situations or triggers that bring them back up again. Don't be surprised. That is going to happen. But we will run into problems if that happens and we are processing everything all over again. Actually, you don't have to do that. You probably just need to process that new thing that has brought it up and then go back to moving on, right? Don't let it come up and then drag you all the way back to where you were. And that's usually the time where the enemy's telling you as well that nothing's changed, nothing's different, you're the same, all the things you thought you had done and the ways in which you thought you had grown, you haven't really, there's no point anyway, all of it is a waste of time. Sis, don't let that happen. Process the new thing, work through the new thing, talk to whoever you need to talk to about the new thing, but let's deal with it as a new thing, not go back to the whole history of everything all over again. Yeah, I'm not going to deny that this is really hard. Like, change is difficult. Change is uncomfortable. And so sometimes you just want to talk about how you're struggling. I think there's absolutely a place for reaching out to your friends, your family, your community, and just talking about how you're struggling. Not all the conversations have to be about like, do better, be better. This is, the steps to take. Sometimes we're just being brutally honest with ourselves, with our friends, with God about how difficult something is. There have been times where I've said to God, like, I literally cannot see how I will get from A to B unless you help me all the way and hold my hand all the way. Because sometimes I don't feel like I've got it in me, I feel like I've come a long way, but there's still hurdles, there's still hurdles that feel like mountains before us that we can, take to God and absolutely be sharing that in time. And that is part of the process too. It's part of being accountable, where people can then share with you, stories and resources, and really just help you when you feel like you don't have the strength. And if the time comes where you are questioning why it's worth even doing all of this in the first place, you are not alone. There are many times where, like I said, I just was like, I don't think anything's ever gonna change, in this situation. But I don't want to constantly be trying to protect myself and help myself and keep myself safe and be fearful of the world around me or people. I also don't want to be hurting others. I genuinely care about, being a kind person to others and leaving others better than, before they met me or interacted with me. And so it does matter. It matters beyond my discomfort. And there are bigger things at stake, and they're things that I want to see and begin to enjoy, that the work is required for. And I want my life to glorify God. I want God to be seen, his power, his love, to be seen through, my story, my journey. And so if I give up now, like, the faith is not living faith. And it's not to say that, again, the desire to give up never comes, but sometimes just rest. Rest, don't stop. And take time. But sometimes we need to be reminded why any of this is even important to be fighting for, or working through in the first place. So we've talked identifying, we've talked navigating. And so now I really just want to encourage you about God's grace in your imperfections. So the first thing I would ask is there a healthy side to some of these red flags? They're red flags probably because something extreme is happening. You're having an extreme reaction, or you're behaving in a way that, just doesn't feel within reason. But there will be a balanced side, a healthy side, if you will, to the same behavior that you're displaying. So for example, when I talk about, being chronically organized and, this kind of wanting to be in control of everything to feel safe, the healthy side of that is being reliable. I love bringing order out of chaos, and friends, family, loved ones, even at work, I can be relied on, and that's a good thing. So I just want to encourage you that some of your red flags, actually, if you can just get them to a place of balance, they're actually good things underneath all of the messiness. Another thing I want to say is that God does not need you to be perfect to bless you. God's blessing and his love is not conditional on you getting your act together. Even in the midst of all of the mistakes that I feel that I've made, I'm experiencing God's grace, his restoration, and his blessing. That looks like, getting new opportunities. Like sometimes you think what you've done or what happened, like, oh, now that's it. Now this is where, life stops and God's not interested in that area of your life, or he's not, wanting to give you good things or bless you with good things or, move you forward. When the reality is that, God is moved by your struggles, and actually he would love to see you in a different place. But on the journey, while you're still on the journey, that doesn't stop him from continuing to, be with you, to help you, and to open doors where you're concerned as well. So be reassured, be encouraged by the fact that God is still for you. And we know from our Bibles all too well how much God uses the unusual, the unsuspecting, and even the broken for his purposes. So you are not written off from his perspective. Another encouragement is something one of my friends actually shared with me, and it really has stuck with me. And I remember going on about something I did and just staying in that place of, guilt, shame, regret for too long. And she said to me, look, people have done worse things and they've still been fine. And people have done not even half of the thing that you did and everything, went wrong. So it's almost like Ecclesiastes says, time and chance happens to them all. And I know that I'm using that, very loosely. But the point is, like, if it was all dependent on exactly what you did, exactly when you did it, exactly, like all the things, and that is how life is going to happen for you, then all it means is that the people who get, make good decisions all of the time, which is no one, by the way. But anyway, the people who, make good decisions, this is the definite outcome. And the people who, go in this direction, this is the definite outcome. Life doesn't work like that. Life does not work like that. I don't know how long you have to live to realize that life really doesn't work like that. But be at peace that God is, at work in the bigger picture. And yes, you have a part to play, but you are not ultimately in control of the entirety of the story of your life and how it's unfolding. There are ways in which we see in the Bible that people's mistakes might have made things take longer, or they might have had to go a certain route. But sometimes they still end up in exactly the same destination they needed to. Now, obviously, I've talked about, losing things and stuff like that. So we see as well in the Bible situations where someone did something that we're thinking is quite minor. And then the consequence was like, whoa, like how did all of that happen just off the back of that one little thing? If your life was depending on you getting everything right, sis, you're already done for anyway. Like it's a wrap. It's a wrap. So we have to believe that God has a say in how your life is going as well and how things are happening. And if he doesn't give up on us at any point, then it's not over till it's over. It's interesting as well when you meet new people because they only know who you are from the point that they meet you. It's almost like you turn over a new leaf with them. And those people just see you from a different perspective than you probably see yourself. Because even though they might be able to appreciate some of the things you share with them that have happened before they entered into your life, they might just have more grace than is typical for someone who maybe was in your life throughout. So there is a place for obviously people who know and love you unconditionally to walk with you through certain things. But sometimes it's refreshing actually to meet new people who don't know anything about anything. And you can just be the current version of yourself with them going forward. So yeah, I found that really interesting as well, and that's worth remembering. Another encouragement is that you can ask God to heal the people that you have impacted negatively. You can pray for restoration as well. You don't even have to specifically mean anything in particular by that. I think it's okay to leave it open for God to do what he thinks is best. But you can pray for that. God has a grace towards them as well. And you can, intercede for them and specifically ask him for his grace towards them as well, even though you're the person. Yeah, even though you're the person who, are the perpetrator, you can do that. You can do that. And that's encouraging. I would say that that's encouraging. It's encouraging that we are evolving, like I said earlier in the video, irrespective of where you feel you are right now, there will always be more. So actually, you're not trying to get to a finish line or to perfection. You're just trying to get to a place where you are, healthy and have the tools and the right mindset and the right attitudes to operate in a healthy way when you're interacting with other people. But that's not to say that new situations won't arise and new ways that you need to grow won't show up. So knowing that this is a moving train is actually encouraging, because it doesn't feel like, oh, I just need to get perfect and then everything will be perfect. It's like, no, you'll get healthy and you'll be in a good place, but there will always be more. And finally, this is my biggest thing, because this is another reason why, I started this channel. You can use your mistakes to help guide others. We know how costly it is to learn from our own mistakes. But now that we've made them, we might as well make them useful and use them to help others, where people are, coming to you and seeking guidance, or you can even spot, things in people that you can graciously speak to in love. But yeah, I would say that I find it encouraging that it doesn't actually go to waste and somebody else can learn from it. So that's me for today. And as usual, I will be praying for you as I pray for myself. I will be praying that God will bring to light the things that he wants to help us with, so that we can move forward to a new and healthy place. I will be praying that God will heal those who have been impacted negatively by our red flags, and that, we will experience the peace of knowing that we are already right now loved unconditionally, but also embrace the challenge to heal and to grow and to experience a new level of freedom. As always, this is a conversation, so I want to know from you, what are some red flags historically that you feel like you have worked so well on that you wouldn't necessarily consider them red flags anymore? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.